And today we've got Nathan Markham and Tamika Piper, and they are going to talk to us a little bit about literature reviews once again. And the last session, if you were able to make that one, it was fantastic. And we talked about note taking. Today we're going to talk a little bit about doing those annotated bibliographies. And we know that we've got folks who are going through this process of doing literature reviews and getting things ready for whatever publication or writing piece that you need. So we are super excited that you guys have joined us today. If you missed the first session, what I'll do in just a few minutes is I will drop the YouTube link to that session in the chat so that you can check that out at a later time. And with this particular presentation, we're recording it, and we will also upload that to our grad office YouTube page, which is a wealth of information about different things and resources. So definitely check that out in your time as spare time as well. The other thing I want to remind you guys of is that this fantastic collaboration with the University Writing Center and the University Library does not have to end here, right? With the University Writing Center, we also have our weekly writing group called Writing in Community. And it is a drop-in and write type of thing. So you don't have to feel obligated or any type of, don't have to feel any type of way. If you haven't been coming to those sessions, you can start whenever you need to. And that's on Wednesdays from 4 to 6 o'clock. I'm also going to throw some information about that into the chat as well. So without further ado, usually I like to ask people how they're doing. So if you want to put in your chat or use your reactions to let us know how you're doing today. The sun is out. I don't know what the temperature is, but I think it's going to be our last super sunny, nice day for a couple of days. So definitely take a minute and share with us how you're feeling today. I see some smiles popping in the chat. I am hanging loose today. So yep, Megan, I see you. A little nervous and a little, yeah. Harry, I see this angel smile. Love it. Love it. Awesome. So, yeah, you feel compelled, let us know how you're feeling. Let us know how you're doing. And we are super excited to have you with us today. So without further ado, I'll let Nathan and Shavika take it over. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and also unmute yourself if you'd like to ask any questions as we go along. Thanks, everybody.
All right. I want to emphasize also that I love it, when this can be an interactive workshop. So if you have any thoughts, questions, concerns throughout, feel free to just throw them in the chat, or if you feel so moved, even to unmute and ask. Today, I'm from the Writing Center. I'll be going first, talking about annotated bibliographies and starting to draft your literature review. I'm coming at it from a composition studies angle, and then Tamika Piper will talk about it more from an information science angle. And between the two of us, hopefully cover all bases and be able to answer any questions you might throw at us. Like I said, we love questions, definitely thoughts, questions, concerns, general emotions. Feel free to drop them in the chat. Okay. So last time we talked about critical reading and note-taking skills to help with reading comprehension. So making the most of your time spent reading and turning that reading time into writing and writing prep time. Today, we'll be talking about using those notes that you've already taken to create an annotated bibliography that will give you a strong start for actually drafting your literature review. Like Tabitha already said, we do have part 1 up on the YouTube page, but you should be able to understand today's session pretty well without having attended the previous one. So no worries there at all. Okay, so today I'll start by telling you a little bit about the Writing Center and what I do there. Then we'll dive into defining what literature reviews are, what annotated bibliographies are, and how they work in conversation with each other. We'll talk about using your notes, structuring annotations, and finally building all of that into a draft. Okay, so first, a little bit about the Writing Center. If you haven't been to the Writing Center, I definitely suggest that you come. We are a space for all writers in all areas of the writing process, and we are here to answer any writing question whatsoever. So if you're feeling stuck in your writing in any way, or even just kind of feel like, you know, I would benefit from being able to talk about this with somebody, please come in and see us. Kind of the bread and butter of what we do is one-to-one writing support. So you come in, we talk to you for 45 minutes about your writing, and then you hopefully return home with a renewed sense of clarity and optimism. We also run workshops like these. Yeah, lots of, pretty much if it is related to writing, we deal with it in some way. Tabitha already mentioned our writing and community workshops. We offer a variety of workshops that are specifically for our graduate students. I definitely recommend coming to Writing and Community if you're somebody who finds yourself struggling to build writing time into your schedule, because it's like a focused 2-hour block where you can sit with a trained writing consultant and other graduate students in a Zoom room, and have both like the time blocked off in your calendar and the accountability. There's something about being in a Zoom room with other people who are also working toward a common goal that really gets you like motivated. And if you were feeling discouraged about your writing in any way, it can get you unstuck. So without further ado, let's talk about annotated bibliographies and literature reviews. Kind of a refresher from last time, literature reviews collect key sources on a topic and put those sources in conversation with each other to give an overview of one specific area of focus within the topic. Sometimes you'll see these in like academic articles, or they can be published as a standalone piece. If you're working on a thesis or a dissertation project, chances are you are interacting with literature reviews in a variety of ways. You're probably writing one to go in a thesis or dissertation, probably reading them to understand like what you need to read. Basically, like if you need to collect, synthesize, and analyze existing research, literature review is a format that describes that kind of work. Okay, so an annotated bibliography is, I like to think of it as like the bones of a literature review before you've even like articulated how these things are gonna necessarily like lay when the paper is finished. It's the sources that go into it. It's a list of sources with the citation and whatever citation style that you're using already intact, with a description of what the source is, what kind of work that it does, and how you plan to use it in your literature review. I have a lot of people in the Writing Center who scheduled me to talk about making annotated bibliographies, say, well, how do I do it correctly? Like, what is the one thing I need to know about how to write an annotated bibliography that will be perfect, that will fit all of my needs perfectly? And it just isn't that simple, because you might be doing an annotated bibliography to better understand your own sources. You might be doing one to show a co-collaborator or like a professor what your research is. Like there's so many different contexts that you might make an annotated bibliography for. Maybe your primary audience is yourself as a researcher, like just articulating what you plan to use these sources for. Maybe your primary audience is a professor or a fellow researcher. The way that you structure your annotations will set up for like whatever purpose your bibliography and your literature review are for. Okay, so basically annotated bibliographies in terms of what they can do for you, can help you to decide which sources feature most prominently in your literature review. They can give you the structure to start articulating a rough outline for how your sources are going to work in conversation with each other. They can help you narrow down your topic. So like I often will approach an annotated bibliography with an idea that my topic is going to be much larger than it is. And then the more sources that I read, the more I see how they fit or don't fit together, the more I understand like what is actually manageable within the context of my literature review. So sometimes you might read a source and annotate it in your annotated bibliography, and then it might not end up in your literature review at all, or it might end up playing a very small role. That's just like part of the process. I wouldn't think of that as wasted time or wasted research, but rather like a slow chipping away at what the core of the thing that you're researching is. And like chipping down to that core is how you articulate your research question and or your working thesis statement that will be able to guide you in creating a meaningful outline. Last time we talked a lot about critical reading strategies and ways to document what you were reading as you were reading it, and to even start thinking about how the things you're reading work in conversations with each other. I talked a little bit about annotations in a very limited context before, but emphasized like documenting moments where you were drawn to the text where you thought, oh, this might work in an interesting way with another source. And we talked about like grabbing those quotes, keeping them intact with the page number, and just letting yourself note take in a messy way as you read to make the most of your reading time. The difference between a double entry journal, like we talked about last time, and an annotated bibliography is that double entry journals are meant to embrace that messiness of very early research. They're meant to help you capture those moments that spark your interests, make your in-text citations easy, like give you an idea when you glance at the page, oh, this is what I thought was interesting from the source, and begin to help you think about how these sources might work together. Annotated bibliographies are about taking that mess and making meaning of it. So you look at like the whole mess of quotes that you've pulled out and like in the moment messy thoughts that you had while you were writing. You think, wow, okay, what from this is actually the core of how this source is going to fit into my final project? That's the work of taking it from the double entry journal to the annotated bib. And then as you turn the messiness of like your initial thoughts when you were reading into more structured articulations of what the source is and how you're going to use it, that lets you gain a better understanding of the material. And as you write those sentences where you're talking about the source in your own authorial voice, these are sentences that might make it into your draft and into the final paper maybe. And finally, like if you're dealing with a lot of sources, which probably are, thinking about how those sources connect to each other can be really tricky. You're probably going to see way too many connections between these sources. And so what you documented when you were first reading through these sources is likely to be messier and bigger than you need it to be. So taking it from those initial notes to the annotated bibliography is a space where you start to understand which connections between texts are most important. Some questions to be asking yourself as you're doing each annotation. Who is the audience for your annotation? Are you writing primarily for yourself now, yourself in the future? Do you need a professor or advisor to be able to read what you've written and understand it as immediately as you yourself would? Are these sources relating to other sources in ways that are meaningful? What is their main takeaway from each source? What parts of each source do you think are going to be most useful for the purposes of your research? This is a big question. Because even if it's like an article, not even like a full length book, but an article, there might be some sections that are going to be more meaningful to you than others. Maybe your first read through it all seemed interesting and applicable, but then when you're actually thinking about it, you might realize that some parts of this source do more than others. Like you might realize, oh, at the end of the day, the only thing I really need from this specific source is this definition of this term, or like this connection between these two other sources. And also, this is a space, particularly if your literature review that you're writing is something that fits into a larger article or thesis or dissertation. Like this is a space in your annotated bibliography to start thinking about methodology and format of these sources. Like how are they written? Is there anything about the way that they're written that you would want to emulate in your own work? Are you understanding conventions of your specific field and genre of writing better by reading all of these articles? And like in terms of methodology, how are their studies made? Are you going to be structuring your studies in the same way, in different ways? They're all things that can go in your annotations as you see necessary. All right, so all these questions that you're asking yourself as you were annotating each source are going to impact the way that you go about annotating. Like I said before, there really isn't one specific correct way to annotate a source. It's all really context dependent. This is an example from Auckland University of how somebody might choose structure and annotation from a scientific study. This source, like the format is really streamlined, and there's not really a huge amount of context about study design, etc. Basically, the audience for this annotation seems to be not just the author, seems to be an annotation that needs to be understood by people more broadly speaking. So if that is the kind of thing that you're thinking about in your annotated bibliography and your literature review, this kind of structure might work really well for you. The like research topic, like the question, the core question the source tackles is toward the top, necessary context, finding and results, and then the overall significance at the bottom. This source is annotated in a way that is more casual. This is from Purdue OWL's website. It's on the shorter side. It seems to be still needing to be understood by like a professor or a collaborator or someone like that, but not necessarily by like a broader context of academics beyond that specific context. Another interesting thing to point out here is that the author is using the annotated bibliography not just to record their research, but to like explain why it matters in the context of what they're doing. So it's pretty simple structure that's being used here. They have the summary of their source, evaluation of their source, and then the analysis of how the source fits in with their research. And then, I also wanted to mention that annotations can be like any length that you need them to be. So if this were a source that were super important to this author, they might have chosen to write a lot more in each of these paragraphs. Whereas like the other source was articulated in just one block, one annotation. Okay, and then this is an annotation that is messier, that is specifically for the researcher. It has a lot of the same components as the other annotations we just looked at. It has the brief summary of the source. It analyzes the way that the source works, the form of it. It gives context, but it gives context in ways that are specific for the particular project that it's shaping, rather than just like context for other scholars in the field, and it spends a lot more space talking about what portions of the source will be used in the literature review itself. So all of these examples of annotations are different because they need to be different for the literature reviews that they pertain to, and to how the annotated bibliography itself is being used, like whether it's being used just to record your own research and to think through how your sources are going to fit together versus if you need to communicate those connections to an external audience. Some good things to remember as you're approaching an annotated bibliography, regardless of who the audience is, the main purpose is to condense your information so that people don't have to read so you or who your audience is doesn't have to read the source in order to understand the annotation. The annotation should tell you pretty much everything you need to know about the source. And strong topic sentences can help you to keep your annotation on track. So the annotations, when they talked about like the purpose of the research, what the study was doing, used like concrete, easy to understand sentences that didn't have a huge amount of jargon. And so like letting yourself adhere to some structure in your annotation, making sure that you're hitting the pieces that you need to hit, like what is this article doing? How does it do it? What will I use? Like, if you give yourself some structure like that, even if it's loose, you'll be able to keep yourself on track better with your annotated bibliography. At the end of the day, though, there's no real wrong way to do it. There's no single narrative for how to do an annotated bibliography, just like there isn't a single narrative for how to make a literature review. Okay. So we talked a lot about annotated bibliographies themselves, how they're constructed. Now let's talk a little bit about like using the annotated bibliography as a space to start building toward your draft. Everybody does this a little bit differently. Some people like to draft the outline of the literature review alongside the annotated bibliography. Some people prefer to do the entire annotated bibliography first and then look at that and let, after the annotations are done, use those annotations to build an outline. I'm the kind of person who needs to think about everything all at once. So I started thinking about the outline for my literature review while I'm still taking my notes before I even make an annotated bibliography. But in making this workshop, I was talking to a lot of my coworkers who have similar backgrounds in composition studies. And some of them were like, yeah, I do that too. Others were completely floored with the idea that I could be thinking about outlining while I'm still writing an annotated bibliography. So I recommend trying it both ways, seeing what works for you, understanding that what works for you is going to shift over time as you develop as a writer, and also it might change between research projects. So you might find that it's easier to be thinking about outlining while you're doing an annotated bibliography if you're writing like a smaller literature review versus if you're writing a literature review that fits into a dissertation or a thesis. So whatever works for you in terms of contextualizing how the annotated bibliography fits into your specific writing process. Regardless of if you like to outline while you're annotating or after, the information about how you use each source in your literature review is the thing that becomes the foundation of your outline. So you narrow it from your initial messy notes where you're seeing all these connections. Like you take that, you find like the most important kernels of connection between your different sources. And then those connections and how you use the source is that is what the literature review is and what the outline is. So as you articulate those things in your annotations, I don't know, I always feel a sense of like accomplishment when I articulate a connection like that, because I know that it's going to fit into my final product. Keep in mind, there is no single right way to make that jump from note-taking to annotating to drafting. Let yourself be flexible and fluid from day to day, project to project, as you learn more about yourself as a writer. That being said, one thing that I do recommend that everybody at least try in this jump from annotated bibliography to draft is some free writing. Because even once you get everything condensed to an annotation where you can just look at the most important parts of each source and the most important connections between them, it can still be daunting because it's a lot of sources. And you might think, well, where do I even start? How do I even start outlining and like taking this to the next step when, it just seems so like there's just so much material. One way to break out of that mindset and like the writer's block is to just let yourself, or maybe better way to phrase it would be make yourself free write. So maybe try isolating like one specific connection you've made between texts and think, okay, how do these things, like what is more information about how these things fit together? Give yourself like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, however long you think would work. Tell yourself, I'm just going to sit at my computer and I'm going to free write. I'm not going to judge myself about whether this writing is good or bad. I'm not going to think about whether it's productive or not productive. I'm just going to give myself 10 minutes. I'm going to free write about this particular connection between sources. And then if it's useful, that's great. And if it's not, then I guess I just wasted 10 minutes and that's not the end of the world. I have never free written and had it be a waste. Every time there's at least some specific connection or wording or just articulation of a connection that comes out in that free write that, even if it doesn't end up in my final drafts, was a necessary stepping stone toward me understanding what my literature review does and doesn't do. Some other things to think about in terms of giving yourself little free writing assignments might be like if the connections between texts angle doesn't work for you, like what do I already know about this topic? What new information have I learned about it? And what are other people saying about it? Whatever like feels like the easiest entrance to you to free write, that's a great place to start. Free writing is like emphasis on the free part. It's not a thing that you don't have to say, oh, I told myself I'm only going to articulate this one connection. I'm not allowed to write about anything else. If you start writing about like one connection between texts, or like one particular angle, and you start to see other connections, absolutely chase that. Free write, connect, let yourself get the messy writing out there, because once you get things on the paper, you can begin to understand and organize them and structure them. When it's in your head, it's messy and you can't do anything with it. When it's on the paper and it's messy, now you can do something with it. Now you've articulated something that you're going to be able to manipulate, or even if you look at it and you think, oh, this isn't the right direction, now you understand that that's not the direction to go. You will learn something or gain something. Yeah, definitely encourage free writing. Finally, another core thing to think about is keeping yourself on track. So set small manageable goals, which is a thing we can support with in writing in community. Understand how long you can write productively. Maybe you're a person who writes really well in like 30-minute increments. Maybe you're a person who like really needs 2 to 3 hours set aside at a time to really accomplish anything productive. Like be realistic with yourself about what kind of writer you are and build your schedule around that. Keep track of your writing time, whatever it looks like to build structure for yourself. Give yourself small manageable goals and continue to accomplish those small manageable goals, and maybe even share this process with other people for added community and accountability. Okay. I'm going to turn it over to Jamaica now. Does anyone have any like questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I think Jamika will have like more space for people to participate. You're still muted, Jamika.
Can you guys hear me? Hi, hi, how's everybody doing? Some of you guys are looking a little bit glazed over by the face. I hope everything is going well. I am not going to take too much of your time, but I think that Nathan just went over a lot of the key points. And what I kind of want to do now, um, I'm the kind of person that when I do these type of activities, I think it's important that you guys have something that you can kind of refer back to. So I actually made a handout for you guys. Unfortunately though, I updated before this workshop. So this will come back to you guys, I think later, either Nathan will send it out or maybe tap Dr. Hardy will. But I kind of want to take that information about annotated bibliographies, and I want to transfer it a little bit to how we think about literature reviews. So a literature review is, when we talk about, it's a synthesis, and synthesis is summary plus analysis. So what does that actually mean? Particularly when you've got all this great literature, you feel like, okay, now I'm ready to write, but maybe I'm feeling overwhelmed because there's so much literature. And I think what tends to happen when you're kind of overwhelmed is a lot of people either feel like they have to keep on reading, like they don't know when to stop. So how do I know when I have enough? And the answer is you could kind of read infinitely. You have to kind of make your own stopping point. And one way to do that, let me scroll down here, is to first start off by doing a little bit of mapping. So you have to decide, okay, what is it that I'm actually trying to articulate? That is the key focal point. So I went ahead and I got this little example right here. So this is my, let's say this is my thesis statement. Okay, I'm going to look at early adolescent Black male students that are disproportionately excluded from gifted and talented track programming because of culturally stigmatized traits, which are connected to leadership development and intellectual curiosity. That is a whole mouthful, right? So if this is my argument, I need to make sure that I am laying out the sources by type that will allow me to make this argument and sustain this argument. So when I think about that, so the first pot of resources that I need something about the background, right? And the background I need has to be about the gifted and talented programs. Things related to the curriculum, things related to student selection criteria. The other pot of resources I need is probably about Black adolescent development theory and educational psychology. So there's this piece where what is the sort of theoretical or critical, and if you're more sort of on the quantitative and qualitative end, what is the more methodological approaches that I need to outline, right? So I need information that speaks to those 2 points. I also need information that maybe, because my key issue is I'm going to talk about this in terms of um, leadership in student success, particularly African-American leadership in student success. So I need something that looks at that area as well in order to help sustain and make my argument. So when I'm trying to evaluate if I am on the right track as far as the sources that I'm choosing to incorporate, I can go and I can look at my sources and look at my thesis. And if I have sources that maybe that aren't necessarily aligned with my thesis goal, I can probably exclude it, or I can probably put it on a back burner and I might come back to that later in some fashion. The other thing I might do then is, well, maybe I really like this particular literature. but it doesn't quite go with my thesis. So then I have to ask myself, well, does the thesis statement I'm making capture exactly what I'm trying to do? So this is where you start to get some of those reflective questions, I think, that Nathan brought up under the annotated bibliography, right? So those kind of sets of questions also apply to your decision making around what sources to incorporate or not. And I'm going to take a pause break. Questions from the audience? You can either drop them in the chat or you can go ahead and unmute yourself. Hearing none. Once, twice, thrice. All right. Hearing
Just
no.
say, sorry.
Yes.
Thank you. So as you start, is it a must that you always should have a thesis?
No,
Okay.
not at all. So if you are at a stage where you are just trying to, let's say you have a rough idea, this is where doing those free writing exercises is really useful. I don't know if you, so my particular style, for example, is I am a, let's call it a doodler. So I like to doodle. So as part of my free writing, I might just be like, okay, I know roughly I want to talk about, oh, I don't know. What is your area? What's a topic you might be interested in, Dennis?
Philanthropy.
Okay, so you're into philanthropy. What about philanthropy?
African philanthropy.
Okay, so if I'm Dennis and I know I'm interested in African philanthropy, so that would be at the top of my notes. And then I might break that down into say like, okay, am I interested in organizations that do African philanthropy? Am I interested in international relations through philanthropy in Africa? Am I interested in XYZ? So these are really broad topic ideas. But even knowing that much is kind of useful because it's going to guide me on the type of sources, like when I start doing my research, right? I know off the bat I can look up at different NGOs that might be located in Africa. I might want to look up organizations that have trade and or partnerships, and I might want to look at the impact of those, like statements or find articles that talk about the impact of what these trade relations in terms of philanthropy or in terms of other issues I might be interested in, what the impact of that has been. So if you don't start off with thesis statement, that is perfectly fine. So this is also kind of what I wanted to start to say here. You don't have to know exactly what you want to do, but you do need at least a rough idea. So if through free writing, I think free writing is exactly what you need to do if you kind of have a rough idea, but you haven't fine-tuned it yet. Okay. Hopefully, did I answer your question, Dennis? Can I? Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So what happens? So let's say I've gathered my resources and I realize I do have all of the sources. I feel like I have all the sources or sources representing my top 3 areas based off of whatever my idea or thesis statement is. Now I need to go into part 2. This is where I start trying to make some sense of what it is that I'm actually reading, right? So this is where I think note-taking is super important, but also annotating. And again, annotating, I think Nathan talked about like the double journal entry. As a doodler and as someone who just loves visual things, it doesn't even have to be like double entry, right? If I'm a person who like prints stuff out, for example, a thing I might want to do, I might just start using a system of symbols. So I like to draw random things like diamonds, flowers, right? Some girls like hearts, I like diamonds. So I might use diamonds, hearts, flowers as I'm like taking my notes, now I might use that to sort of talk about different types of ideas. So I might assign those values to be like, okay, this was a really golden idea. This is not so golden. And then on the side, I would just say, well, here's kind of why I thought that this was a good idea or not a good idea. Or this is how I might come back and use this later. And this is what I'm doing, of course, is I'm printing out articles or something of that nature. If I'm online, so you can annotate articles online via if you have Acrobat Adobe, so you can do it that way. You can do it through Microsoft. Some of you might have, I think it's called Hypotheses, which is an annotation system. You can use it that way as well. It doesn't really matter if you're doing it online or if you're doing it by hand. I think developing a system for how you sort of annotate notes is still going to be important for you. But as long as you start having like those kind of offhand notes, it makes it easy to do something that's called the synthesis grid. And so synthesis grids, there's different types, or there can be different types depending on what you want to do. So what I have here is just a couple. So let's say that the whole point of my literature review piece is trying to draw the connection between my theoretical framework and maybe some outcomes. So I think the example we just went through would be a perfect case point for this. So instead of theorists, I might have organizations. I might go online and I might go to their organizational site, and then I might pull quotes that they've talked about their philanthropy, or where they've talked about like the impact of their philanthropy, and I might go and find other pieces of information from other people who've been affected or by that organization to see if they agree with what they said or might disagree, but explaining a little bit more context about that opinion. That's just one way that I might approach it. Another way I might approach doing synthesis is, let's say I'm dealing with something, and so in my case point, my example, these are the basically key terms I would be researching. And so I would want to go and find research that gives me clear definitions. And from those, I would try to come up with use for examples. So real world examples where these concepts have been applied. And then of course, I'm forcing myself. So this is where the free writing is very useful. But I'm forcing myself to draw the connection between the literature and how I see it supporting my argument, right? So it's very important that you are bringing your own authorial voice into the conversation of literature. That is the whole point, I think, of synthesis grids, okay? And of course, of literature reviews, because you don't want to just map out literature. You also want to interject your voice, your position, your argument, right? This is how my argument fits within this literature. Does that make sense? Okay. And of course, I just put a last one. So maybe I'm doing something that's a little bit more theoretically driven or more methodological. I can just sort of start comparing and contrasting what people are saying on the topic. So once I get my synthesis in place, then I got to decide, how am I going to organize this information? There's so many ways you can actually organize your literature. The best, and this is where it's going to come down to understanding the conventions of your field or organization. So my background is primarily in literature, so it makes sense for me to do either a thematic or topical type of organizational pattern. So topical, so maybe I'm just writing about, these are some of the key themes that you see in someone's novel, short stories. If I'm doing more topical, I think it'll be something like, I'm going to write about key issues of the 21st century. And those key issues are going to be around urbanization, et cetera, et cetera. So I can organize that way. Other ways might be, again, if I'm doing more of a social science, if I'm from more of a social science background, or more technical background, it might make sense for me to actually be trying to talk more about methodology, more about the technique that's applied. Like, here's this history of different techniques that have been used, or different medicines that have been used to treat this illness. But these are where these people have, or these treatments have failed, and here's why I think this particular option would be better. So that is as much as I've gotten so far. So hopefully I wasn't too mumbling, but does anyone have any questions or anything that they want to say? So, okay, so I'm gonna take this silence. So is the silence, oh my gosh, that was so clear? Or is the silence, oh my God, what just happened?
It was clear.
Thank you.
So, and to add to the clarity, I just had a question. You did talk about each field having its conventions and the value of understanding the conventions of the field. Do I derive that from literature that I've read in the field, or is there a place that I can actually go to and find these conventions?
That is a really interesting question. I'm going to say, and then Nathan can kind of chime in here. My experience has been that most people actually learn about the conventions from either instruction, like core classes in their discipline, or from actually reading in the field.
Oh no, is she frozen for you too?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, she just froze up.
Oh. Yeah, I agree with what she was saying. I think that like when professors in their classes will teach you about like the conventions for a specific discipline, they're going to be doing the kind of genre analysis that you can also do on your own. So looking to see how articles work and maybe explain why they work that way. If you're not getting the kind of support from your classes that you need in that specific area, then you can always like do that genre analysis on your own. And if you have any questions, bring it to a professor. Say, like, I noticed that this study worked this particular way and it was structured like this. This other article was structured this other way. Is there one particular right way that I should think about structuring this for my project? Like if you're working toward a dissertation or a thesis, you probably have a committee or at least like a thesis advisor that whose job it is to talk to you about like the writing of the thing. I think taking initiative and thinking about structure as you're doing the reading for your project can be really useful, but definitely don't be afraid to reach out to your professor and other like scholars in your field who are around you for more clarity.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. You all should have someone who is kind of serving as a mentor throughout the process. So definitely reach out to them about their preferred methodology as to how they would want you to kind of go about structuring things. But also, the more you read, the more you go through papers, you'll kind of develop kind of your own style with things as well. So don't take that lightly, because you'll see how those papers are structured. You'll develop, kind of your own way of communicating those things, and then also your own way of bringing all of that information together. So you got it. You can do this.
Also, feel free to come into the Writing Center at any point in your research writing process, even if you just have like an outline, you're trying to make the jump between like notes to outlining and drafting. If you're trying to understand how to use an annotated bibliography, literally anything, feel free to come and talk to one of us. It can be really easy to get too deep in your head and worrying about whether or not you're doing it correctly, when there isn't really like a correct or incorrect way to write. Like if you're not writing, you're doing it wrong, basically. And that's why I emphasize so much, and so did Jamika, embracing the messiness of like finding out what your topic is, what your research question is going to be, messiness in like the note taking, messiness in the drafting, because like it's just not going to be streamlined and linear. Like no matter how much you want it to be, it simply is not going to be that. So just let it be messy, get it on the paper, and then you can do something with it. Citation managers make a difference with organizing literature review for a dissertation. Yeah, we talked about citation managers a little bit more last time. I mean, it definitely can. I think that citation managers, at least the way that I've used them, make it easier, like as you're drafting, to be citing things consistently and correctly throughout. But I think there are definitely some that are more geared toward like helping you like organizing like the structure of your literature review, not just the sources that go into it. I tend to navigate the, oh yeah, no worries. But yeah, I tend to navigate like the structure of whatever document I'm working on, like literature review or like any other piece of writing, through using Google Docs. Like I draft in Google Docs because it lets you like pull up the outline that pops up on the side, so I can both get a macro overview of what I'm writing, and I can choose to zoom in on one particular section. Being able to switch back and forth between one way of looking at it and the other is really useful for me. I definitely encourage you to, early on in your time as a grad student, be like spending some time to figure out how you write, how you tend to keep your sources and your thoughts organized. Because like figuring that out is gonna take a lot of work, and you know, doing that earlier rather than later is always better. Hi, Jamika, welcome back.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's pretend that didn't happen. So
Other questions? How y'all feeling? Are you feeling better about the process? Worse? Scarier?
well, the other thing before I got, I think it's holding, before my internet dropped out, I wanted to say this. I'm a subject liaison. You can always go to your subject liaisons. We are more than happy. I am specifically more than happy to sit down with you and go through like your ideas, to sort of give you advice about finding sources. So that should take a lot of, you know, the headache and the scares away. So I think that would be my final tip. Like, don't be afraid to come to us. And I know like you have the writing center, but like if you want to bounce ideas off, I'm always game to do that as well. Okay.
I placed the chat into the chat that subject guide. Okay, so you can find your librarian. They can be so useful and helpful, especially as you go through trying to pull articles, things that are relevant. And use those guides too. They're amazing.
Yeah, so we talked a lot about that. Sorry, I think I talked a lot during that last meeting. Maybe that's why my internet hates me now. But if you can, check out that first video, because I talk a lot about like a lot of different tools for you guys. And also I did create a Adobe Express page with some of those tools talking about like what they do. I don't know if we still have access to that. Like when you put the video up, did you put the link to that as well, Tabitha?
I don't know whatever's in the video is there. It's possible.
So I will pull the link and I'll send that to Tabitha, and we'll see if we can get that added underneath the description on the YouTube video. So that should be clickable from there as well.
Sounds good.
All right, does anyone have any questions about any specific literature review projects you're doing, or even just more broadly writing process, source management related questions?
Let me ask you this then. So no one ever has any questions. Where is Nathan's office located? What? You don't know? That seems like you have a question then, right?
Megan knows.
In the library, right?
Yeah, I don't have an office. I work in the Writing Center. It's University Library 2125. We're open there for consultations Monday through Thursday. Also, I didn't mention before, if you don't like coming to things in person for whatever reason, you can always schedule an online one-to-one consultation. So if not wanting to come to campus is a thing that's been a barrier to you receiving writing support, it definitely doesn't have to be. Please know that you can schedule via Zoom.
And that's the same thing for with your subject liaison. So we schedule in 30-minute or 1 hour increments of time. And if you're on the subject guide, it has if you click, it'll have the set an appointment with me. So you'll see my list of times, availability. And of course, because I'm scared of in-person right now, everything is virtual. So come see me virtually. Come see me virtually.
Yeah, thank you both. I just didn't even know where to start with this really. And one of the things I know I've struggled with large papers in the past is just taking the sources and integrating them into whatever it is that I'm talking about. And I feel like sometimes I just sort of plug things in and hope nobody notices. So I don't really know what to say about it. But so yeah, I think I'm going to give some of this a try, and then might be visiting one of you after I get it going a little.
We look forward to it.
I mean, you talk about just sticking stuff in like it's a bad thing. If it's a connection that you're unsure about or a source you're not sure you use to its fullest and you want to indicate to yourself that you want to come back to it, you can always just highlight it. That's why I keep talking about the writing process being messy, because it's not like you're going to finish one part and then move on to the next part and have it just work nicely like that. It'd be great if it did, but it never does. So always know that you can highlight something and think, oh, that's a little questionable. I'm going to come back to that later. And you'll save a lot more time by just letting yourself move on than you would if you tried to sit there and hammer it out.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thanks. Yeah, I got to start soon enough for there to be a later, I guess. It's another problem, but yeah, definitely. I'm working on not forcing things as much and just writing whatever I feel like writing at the time and trying to get it all to come together later. It's helped a lot.
That's great to hear. Just keep doing that.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Writing is a process, y'all, so don't get frustrated with it overnight. It does take time. Nobody starts out just kind of being Shakespeare, so understand that, right? Or yeah, any of that. So thank you guys for joining us today. Let's thank Nathan and Jamaica again. We appreciate you guys so much. And part 3 of our literature review sessions is in 2 weeks. What's the topic, Nathan?
We're talking about actually writing the thing. So how do you go from outlining, drafting rough ideas to actually understanding how this thing is going to come together? I'll also go more in depth about strategies for success when you're trying to make yourself adhere to very specific goals. So be a fun time. Would love to see you all back.
Sounds like you might want to be there. So, and invite some friends, tell them to join you on Zoom because we know that, a lot of us are on the struggle bus in that area too. So thank you guys again. You have a great day. The sun is out. Enjoy yourself. Bye, everybody.
Bye.